The mist always comes first.
Long before the ships appear before the banners, the bronze helms, and the snarling standards of the Roman eagle, the sea itself warns the coast of what approaches. A breath of salt, a hush in the air, the cry of seabirds twisting in unusual patterns, and then the ships low and lean parting the gray waves as though they belong. Britain, or rather Britannia, a name Rome had whispered for generations. To many across the empire, it was a distant rumor, a place of mud fog and painted tribes. To some, it was a prize left unconquered. But to the men aboard those vessels, inching ever closer to the rocky southern shore, it was something else entirely. A reckoning.
The shoreline did not greet them with fanfare. There were no olive groves or marble harbors here, only jagged cliffs, wind-warped trees, and a cold that seemed to reach through bone. Somewhere inland through the smoke-colored hills and thistle-choked valleys, the Britons watched. Silent, waiting. For Rome, this was not the first attempt. Nearly a century before Julius Caesar himself had ventured into these waters. His arrival had been brief, violent, and ultimately inconclusive. He came, he saw, but he did not conquer. The island had remained beyond Rome's grasp, like a ghost that refuses to be pinned down. But now, under Emperor Claudius, that would change. The ghosts would be named. The fog would be mapped. The island would kneel, or so they thought. The year was AD 43. General Aulus Plautius stood at the helm of one of the leading ships. He was not a man given to poetry, but even he could feel the strange weight of this place. It pressed on the lungs. It curled around the soul like smoke from an unseen fire. Behind him, a fleet of warships carried some 40,000 soldiers. Legions and auxiliaries engineers and cavalry all trained in the ruthless mathematics of Roman warfare. Ahead of him lay Albion. To step onto this land was to step into a world without Latin. No villas, no aqueducts, no temples with marble columns. The land did not know Rome, and Rome did not know it, but it would. The first steps onto the British shore were not triumphant. They were clumsy, wet, and cold. Soldiers slipped on the seaweed-slick rocks, clutching spears and shields as they scrambled through the surf. Horses neighed in confusion. The wind carried strange sounds, animal howls, distant chants, or perhaps just the wind itself, pretending to be something else. No army greeted them. Not yet. The Britons were watching from the hills, letting the invaders tire themselves on wet ground and uncertain paths. These tribes were not fools. They had seen Rome before. They knew the cost of resistance and the danger of underestimating the beast that crossed the sea. Still, even then, some of them wondered why return. What did Rome truly want? The answer, of course, was the same as always. Control, resources, tribute, order. But there was also something more elusive. Rome was obsessed with the idea of boundaries, of marking the edges of its world with stone and fire. To leave a land unconquered was to admit that the world had corners Rome could not reach. Britain was not valuable enough to die for, but it was too wild to be ignored. As the soldiers made camp inland near the banks of the River Thames, the air grew thicker. Not with rain or fog, but with waiting. London had not yet been born. There was no bridge, no bathhouse. Just the river, old and indifferent, flowing past their tents like it had for millennia. And yet, something shifted. Roman engineers began surveying the land. Stones were marked, trees were felled, roads were imagined before they were carved. The empire, as always, did not need permission to dream. It simply built. But even as the first foundations were laid in mud, old eyes watched from beyond the trees. One day, someone found a carving deep within a grove near the river's bend. It was not Latin. The symbols curved like waves, spiraled like shells. It spoke of giants of gods who walked the land before time. The translator laughed it off Celtic nonsense, no doubt. But the soldiers avoided that grove after sunset, not out of fear, out of a feeling they could not explain. Back in Rome, Claudius awaited news. When the report came of landfall secured, of tribes scattered, of progress begun, he staged a triumph. Elephants marched in the streets. Painted reenactors mimicked the submission of British chiefs. Statues were erected, and yet in the real Britain, nothing was truly secured. The hills still whispered, the rivers still carried secrets, and the earth beneath Roman boots was not silent. It was sleeping, waiting. Because some lands are not conquered, they simply allow themselves to be forgotten. They called it a conquest. But the land had other ideas. After landing at the shore and establishing their first foothold, the Romans turned inland. What lay ahead of them was not a battlefield. It was a maze. Dense forests with no paths, marshes that swallowed wagons, hills that rose like broken teeth from the earth. Nothing in this place was designed for straight Roman roads or textbook formations. It was not that the Britons were stronger. It was that the land itself had chosen them. The first real resistance came in a clearing near the Medway River. The Roman scouts had reported strange movements in the woods, shadows that never stood still, fires that left no ashes. When the legions moved forward, they expected ambush. What they didn't expect was silence. No arrows, no drums, no sound of war cries, just the crunch of their own boots on damp soil. Then suddenly horns, not Roman, low guttural blasts that shook the ribs. And then the forest erupted. Celtic warriors poured from the trees like spirits from some ancient ritual. Hair-wild bodies painted in blue spirals. Voices raised not in war, but in mourning, as if each charge was a funeral rite for their homeland. They fought with spears, but also with memories of Caesar's invasion, of Roman betrayal of ancestors, whose names were carved in standing stones. Long before Latin reached these shores, the Romans, trained and disciplined, held the line, shields locked, swords drawn. Formation after formation pushed forward. But the forest fought back. The trees stole their vision. The mud stole their footing. The cold stole their breath. And the Britons, they vanished before they could be caught. It wasn't a war. Not yet. It was something older, a testing. General Plautius realized quickly this would not be like Gaul. These people had no great cities to seize, no centralized kings to crush in a single campaign. The Britons were tribes fragmented, feuding, but fierce. Each chieftain ruled his own patch of land. Some were eager to fight Rome. Others were willing to talk. But all of them knew the land better than Rome ever could. One day, a Roman patrol followed a deer trail deep into the wheeled forest. They never returned. When a second patrol was sent, they found no bodies, only a ring of oak trees, each one carved with a symbol of a horned god, and a Latin phrase scratched into a stone. You do not walk alone here. Some claimed it was a threat. Others thought it was a warning. The Romans continued to build roads. As summer deepened, Rome pushed northward. They took Camulodunum, the fortress of the powerful Catuvalauni tribe. It was a significant victory, but not a final one. For every hill they claimed, another tribe resisted in the next valley. The Roman maps of Britain were blank sheets being filled one skirmish at a time. Each conquest, a scratch, not yet a scar. And then came the battle at the Thames crossing. There in the mist rising off the river, the Roman army met a coalition of British tribes, led by Togodumnus and Carodicus, sons of a fallen king, our commanders of a resistance not born from unity, but from desperation. The battle was chaos. The Thames flooded from recent rains, and the banks turned to sludge. Horses floundered. Javelins were hurled across fog so thick, it was like fighting in a dream. Carodicus, they said, fought like a man who had already seen the end of his people. His sword moved faster than thought. He vanished and reappeared on the battlefield like some ghost from the old stories. Togodumnus was less fortunate. He fell in the mud, pierced through the chest by a Roman spear. The scream that followed was not his. It came from Carodicus, or from the sky itself. It was hard to tell. The Britons broke, and the Romans crossed the river. Rome declared victory. But the men who survived that day knew better. They knew the cost. They knew the look in the eyes of the locals who buried their dead, not with sorrow, but with silence. The conquest had begun, yes, but it was not over. It had only slipped beneath the trees. In the weeks that followed, stories spread among the legions. Stories of Roman scouts led astray by women with eyes like owls, of entire columns that vanished in mists near sacred groves, of strange lights on the hills at night, dancing fires that moved without smoke. Plautius forbade talk of such things. He demanded reports, progress, obedience, but even he walked more softly now. Even he felt it. Britain was not just a place. It was a memory worn into the soil. And it did not forget the blood that had been spilled upon it. At the edge of a Roman camp, a sentry once carved something into a piece of driftwood and left it by the fire. No one knows his name. But the words remained. We did not conquer this land. It let us believe we had. It began not with marble, but with mud. The place was nothing, just a bend in the river Thames, where the water curled like a sleeping serpent, and the banks collapsed into reeds and bramble. No temples, no walls, not even a proper name. Yet here of all places, the Romans saw a future, and so they built. At first it was nothing more than a small supply outpost, wooden palisades, hastily thrown up barracks, and a crude dock to unload shipments from Gaul. But the river was different. Deep, wide, patient. It welcomed the Roman ships as if it had been waiting for them. Engineers walked the muddy banks with their arms outstretched, measuring, imagining. What they saw was not a swamp, but a nexus. A place where roads could converge, goods could flow, and power could sit quietly like a coin hidden in the folds of a tunic. They called it Londinium, a name that rolled awkwardly off the tongue, at first half Celtic, half Latin. No one knew what it truly meant. Some said it came from an old word for wild. Others claimed it was the name of a long-dead chieftain whispered into the soil. But Rome had never needed certainty to name its cities, only ambition. The early structures were humble. Timber frames, thatched roofs, a simple market. But even then, you could see the outline of what was to come. Everything was built with intent, aligned with the rising sun, the curve of the river, the steady march of legionaries. Merchants followed. Blacksmiths, stonecutters, scribes, and with them came families, children. Laughter, reef. A city does not rise with stone alone. It rises with breath. By the 3rd year, Londinium had streets. Straight ones paved in gravel, marked by carved wooden signs. It had bridges, first of wood, later of stone, spanning the Thames like arms, outstretched between 2 worlds. Warehouses stored goods from as far as Syria and Hispania. Amphorae of wine clinked beside baskets of oysters from the Kent coast. It even had a forum, not a grand one, but still columns stood. Statues watched. Latin echoed through the halls. It was here, beneath gray skies and smoke from hearth fires, that Rome began to believe it had planted itself firmly in the island's heart. But the land had not agreed, and yet, beyond the neat grid of streets, the old world still breathed. Burial mounds watched from the hills. Druid groves lingered on the edges of new roads. And sometimes the river would rise without cause, flooding the lower districts, as if in quiet protest. The Britons who lived nearby did not trust the city. To them, Londinium was not home. It was a spell. A mask. Something too clean, too precise, carved from a culture that did not understand the wild heartbeat of the land it stood upon. They came, of course, to trade, to speak, to spy. But they did not linger. They said the city felt hollow, as if it were waiting to be filled with ghosts. Rome sent governors, magistrates, tax collectors. Each one brought more law, more order, more marble. A basilica was raised, the largest north of the Alps. Baths were dug, heated floors. Mosaics of sea creatures and Roman gods now swam beneath the feet of men who had once feared the island's darkness. An amphitheater rose from the earth stone by stone. Gladiators fought there. Lions roared. Blood soaked into soil once reserved for ritual offerings. To the empire, this was progress. To the land, it was something stranger. A new language spoken not with words, but with architecture. And yet Londinium never felt entirely Roman. The fog did not lift. The crows still gathered at dusk. The ground was never truly still. Some nights the city guards swore they heard drums, not from the taverns, but from the forests beyond. Low, rhythmic, like the beating of an ancient heart. Once a Roman surveyors uncovered a set of standing stones while expanding the northern wall. They were carved in spirals, worn smooth by time. He ordered them destroyed. 2 days later, the work crew found their tools missing. Horses refused to approach the site, and one of the engineers began muttering in a language no one could recognize, staring into the mist. They moved the wall south instead. Still the city grew, and with growth came forgetting. New generations were born who had never seen the old tribal lands. Children who spoke Latin better than their grandfather's tongue. Shopkeepers who hung their household gods beside crude charms of local origin, just in case. Rome, it seemed, had begun to merge with Britain. Not fully, but enough. Enough to believe the conquest was complete. Enough to stop listening to the wind. But beneath the stone, the earth remembered. It remembered the battle cries, the treaties never signed, the gods not yet gone. And one day Londinium would remember too, but not yet. It was not built to defend, not truly. Hadrian's wall, sprawling gray monumental, was not so much a shield as it was a statement. A line in the earth, a whisper from Rome to the world this far and no further. But the land north of the wall never asked permission. By the early 2nd century, the Romans had learned something uncomfortable about Britain. They could pave its roads. They could rename its cities. They could even bathe in warm stone pools beside rivers the locals once called sacred. But they could not tame its northern wilds. To the north were the tribes Rome called barbarians, the Caledoni, the Votadini, and others whose names have long since vanished from memory, but still echo in stone and soil. They did not build cities. They did not trade in coin. They moved with the seasons. They carried stories like armor, and they knew the hills and bogs better than any map could dare to guess. Rome sent legions. The legions returned in pieces, or not at all. And so in AD 122, the Emperor Hadrian ordered the construction of a wall. Not a simple barrier, but a grand, continuous division stretching 73 miles from coast to coast, from the River Tyne to the Solway Firth. Stone and turf tower and fort. A ribbon of imperial ambition cut across the wilderness. The message was simple. What lies beyond is not Rome. They say it took 6 years to build. Thousands of soldiers, slaves, and local laborers worked through wind, frost, and rain. Some died before ever seeing the wall complete. Others carved small names into the stones, hoping perhaps to be remembered longer than the empire that ordered the work. When it was done, the wall stood like a spine across the north, silent, heavy, waiting. And just beyond it, the whispering began. Soldiers stationed along the wall were young. Many had never seen Rome itself. They came from far corners of the empire: Germania, Numidia, Syria. To them, Britain was already foreign. The north, it was something worse. They wrote home in short, stiff Latin. Rain every day. The natives stare. They do not blink. I dream of sand. Some heard voices at night, faint chanting from the hills, bells with no source, a sound like breathing rising from beneath the moss-covered ground. One centurion refused to sleep indoors after his first month. He claimed the stone walls hummed when the wind blew from the north. Still life along Hadrian's wall settled into a rhythm. Patrols marched. Forts sent and received reports. Trade passed through controlled gates. But even within that routine, the feeling remained. The wall did not divide peace from war. It divided understanding from myth. On a spring morning, a local tribesman came to one of the gates with an offering 2 smoked fish and a small carved idol, faceless but crowned with antlers. He left it without speaking and vanished into the fog. The garrison commander took the idol inside, placing it on his desk with a bemused smirk. That night, a sudden frost killed every crop within sight of the fort. Horses refused to leave their stables. 3 soldiers woke with bleeding noses and no memory of their dreams. The idol was quietly buried. Rome pretended not to fear the north, but its maps told the truth. Above the wall, the details faded. Cities disappeared. Roads ended. The names grew vague. Terra incognita. To most Romans, it was a place of monsters and mist. To the Britons, it was simply home. And yet even as the wall divided, it also watched. From every mile castle, from every tower, from every narrow slit in stone, soldiers peered out into the moorland. They recorded the movement of distant fires, the paths of stars, the return of wolves. And sometimes they wrote poems, scratched onto bits of wax tablets or into the backs of shield covers. These poems rarely survived. But one fragment did preserved in the ruins of Vindolanda, a fort just south of the wall. Its words were simple: we built a wall. The wind passed through it. We marked the land. The land marked us back. In time, some Roman soldiers married local women, had children, adopted the gods of both cultures just in case. In some forts, altars stood side by side, one to Jupiter, one to a horned god with no Latin name. It was not conquest anymore. It was coexistence, reluctant, fragile, and utterly Roman in its contradiction. But the North did not sleep. Raids continued. Fires bloomed on distant hills. The wall held, but it grew tired. Stones weathered. Guards rotated out. Ambitions shifted, and deeper in the empire, trouble brewed. Rome would not always be strong. The wall would not always be manned. The whispering from the north would one day become a voice, and then no wall could stop it. From the outside, it looked like peace. By the mid-2nd century, Roman Britain shimmered with the signs of a civilization at its height. Roads carved into the bones of the land connected cities like Londinium, Verulamium, and Eboracum. Villas sprawled across the countryside with mosaic floors and imported glass. Aqueducts whispered water into marble basins. Temples rose to Jupiter Minerva and the imperial cult, and everywhere the steam of the Roman bathhouse. The baths of Aquae Sulis, what we now call Bath, were the empire's pride. Hot mineral waters bubbled from the ground once sacred to a native goddess of healing. The Romans took her and made her one of their own Sulis Minerva, a hybrid deity with a Latin face and a British soul. Temples were built beside the springs. Offerings were tossed into the sacred waters. Coins, jewelry, written curses, etched onto thin sheets of lead. Let the thief who stole my cloak be struck dumb and broken. Let him never sleep in peace. Even in the comfort of bathhouses, there was a lingering sense of grievance. And yet the baths were where the illusion felt strongest. There, stripped of armor and cloth, soldiers and civilians alike soaked in warmth beneath painted ceilings and carved lions. The air was thick with perfume and politics. Deals were whispered through steam. Rivalries softened in hot water. To visitors, this was Rome itself reflected in water and stone, as civilized as any forum on the continent. But if you listened closely beneath the splash and conversation, you might hear the stones groan. Not from wear, but from memory. The spring had never asked to be tamed. Beyond the baths, Roman temples dotted the landscape. Some stood where ancient groves had once thrived. Others were built atop burial mounds, deliberately placed as if the empire sought to overwrite not only the land, but its very past. Inside, incense burned. Priests offered prayers in Latin. Sacrifices were made. Ox and dove, sometimes just words, but still the people came with their own gods hidden beneath their cloaks. A woman from a northern tribe might light a candle to Minerva by day, and then whisper to the moon goddess of her ancestors by night. A blacksmith in Londinium might offer his thanks to Mercury with coin and shrine, but wear a charm around his neck in the shape of an oak leaf, something older, something without a name. Rome did not see this as resistance, but the land did. In villas across the countryside, Romanized Britons dined on olives and garum imported from Hispania. They wore togas. They taught their children Latin. Some even gained Roman citizenship, a coveted status that turned tribal leaders into governors, subjects into allies. But identity like peace can be a fragile mask. Scratch beneath it, and the old paint still showed. One night in a villa near Caleva, A feast was held in honor of the Saturnalia festival. Wine flowed. Slaves were temporarily made masters. Laughter echoed through the columns, and then a child asked her grandfather, "Who was Saturn? Before the Romans came." The old man paused. He looked at the stars, not the statues, and he answered not in Latin, but in a language the empire had tried to forget. The child listened. So did the land. Even in the cities, the illusion frayed at the edges. The amphitheater in Londinium hosted games, but the cheers were muted. British audiences never fully embraced gladiatorial blood sport. The animals imported lions, leopards, even bears seemed less terrifying than the forests their ancestors had hunted in. Temples were full, but so were the quiet hills. Beyond the walls, where rituals continued in secret, not with marble altars, but with fire and song. Rome claimed the land, but not its silence. At the heart of it all, a subtle transformation was underway. Roman Britain was becoming something else, not fully Roman, not fully British. A hybrid creature, a ghost of two worlds. The empires believed it had succeeded. The governors sent glowing reports to the continent, taxes collected. Roads maintained, peace sustained. But peace here was not a fact. It was a performance, a skin stretched over bone, and under that skin, old wounds waited. The Druid groves had not been entirely erased. The blood of Boudica still stained the memory of the earth. The whispers beyond Hadrian's wall grew louder. A storm does not begin with thunder. It begins with stillness. In the bathhouses of Aquae Sulis, the water kept flowing. In the temples, the prayers kept rising. In the forums, the laws kept passing. But across the countryside, in stone circles and shadowed woods, people began to gather again. Not in armies, but in memory. The illusion was nearly perfect. But illusions by their nature must shatter, and soon something old would rise from beneath the warmth. Something with a crown of fire and a voice like the wind across forgotten graves. Before she became fire, she was a mother. Boudica, tall, red-haired eyes, sharp as obsidian, was queen of the Iceni, a tribe that had once brokered peace with Rome. Her husband Prasutagus had ruled as a client king loyal to the empire in name, but sovereign in his land. It was a fragile balance held not by respect, but by convenience. And when he died, Rome broke the balance. His will was clear. He left half his kingdom to his daughters, the other half to Rome. It was a gesture part protection, part warning. But Rome took it all. Roman officials arrived like accountants of doom. They seized property, confiscated weapons, stripped tribal nobles of rank. And then, as if to erase resistance before it began, they turned on the royal family itself. Boudica was flogged in public. Her daughters were violated, and the people were made to watch. It was not just conquest, it was humiliation. For weeks, the empire thought nothing of it. Another barbarian queen, another pacified tribe, another wound the land would forget. But Britain remembered, and Boudica did not weep. She gathered. Whispers spread like wind through the fens, across East Anglia, among the Iceni and their neighbors, the Tranovantes, the Cornovi, the Catuvelaoni. The story of the queen grew. Not a tale, a call. She did not speak like a general. She spoke like vengeance given voice. They have taken what they had no right to touch. We shall take what they have built and burn it to ash. Rome never saw the storm coming. Their governors believed Britain pacified. Their legions were scattered, some along Hadrian's wall, others in the west. In Londinium, The newly Romanized elite debated trade and taxes. In Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester, retired Roman soldiers lived in comfort. Arrogant, unguarded, surrounded by symbols of empire, a temple stood there, dedicated to Claudius. Towering, opulent, unmanned. The people hated it. It would burn first. When the revolt came, it was not a skirmish. It was a reckoning. Thousands of warriors moved like a wave through the forests, not in rank or file, but in fury. They struck Camulodunum without warning. The city fell within hours. Houses were looted. Statues toppled. Roman settlers, men, women, and children were slaughtered. The temple of Claudius was set alight, its stone blackened by smoke that rose for days. No quarter was given. None had been earned. The Roman 9th Legion, sent to suppress the rebellion, was ambushed en route. Their infantry were surrounded in the woods. Their cavalry scattered. Their general fled. Only ashes marked their passing. Next came Londinium, the governor of Britain. Gaius Suetonius Paulinus had been campaigning in Wales when news reached him. He rushed to Londinium, but found it undefended, overcrowded, and doomed. He made a cold decision. He evacuated what citizens he could. Then he abandoned the city. Boudica arrived days later. The people who remained merchant settlers, the poor, had no legions to protect them. Londinium burned. Historians argue over the number of dead of 80. The truth is simpler. Entire cities ceased to be. Verulamium followed next. Its forum collapsed in flames. Its statues melted. Its streets ran red. And still Boudica marched. To the Romans it was horror. To the Britons it was justice. Some say Boudica prayed before each battle, not to Roman gods, but to Andraste, the ancient spirit of victory and vengeance. Others say she wore a torque of iron around her neck, and her chariot wheels were painted with blood. Whatever the truth, she had become more than queen. She had become legend. But Rome does not die so easily. Suetonius regrouped. He gathered what remained of the legions, hard men, veterans desperate for redemption. They met Boudica in an unnamed valley. No city stood nearby. No monument would mark the place. But the battle would decide the fate of Roman Britain. The Britons outnumbered the Romans 10-1. Their wagons formed a half-circle behind them. Women and children perched atop, ready to watch Rome fall. But the Roman formation was tight. Discipline over fury, steel over fire, and fire in time consumes itself. The Britons charged. The Roman front held. Their lines did not break. And when they counterattacked, it was brutal. The chaos of the crowd became its own prison. Wagons blocked retreat. The slaughter was immense. Boudica escaped the battlefield. But not the story. Some say she took poison. Others say she vanished into the mists, but her body was never found. Only her silence remained. Rome claimed victory. But it was not the same Rome. The governor was replaced. Policies softened. Fortifications strengthened. And deep within the empire's memory, Boudica remained, not as a barbarian, not even as a rebel, but as a warning. Even today, in the ruins of Colchester, London, and St. Albans, archaeologists find a layer of ash and broken pottery, a blackened scar in the soil. They call it the Boudican destruction layer, but the land calls it something else, a memory that once a queen burned Rome in Britain, and the sky remembered her name. No treaty was ever signed. No emissary rode forth with laurel crowns. No statues were raised in honor of peace. And yet, after the fire of Boudica, something changed. Rome did not retreat, but it did begin to listen. The revolt had shaken the empire to its core. The governor was recalled. Policy shifted. New men arrived in Britain, not conquerors, but administrators. Men who studied grain, yield more than battle formations. Men who spoke less Latin and more compromise. They came with parchment, not blades, and slowly, quietly, a different kind of empire took shape. The Britons did not surrender. They adapted. Tribal elites were offered citizenship not as charity, but as strategy. To become Romani meant protection status and access to the great machine of Roman law and commerce. And so, some Britons put aside their woad and donned togas. They built villas with hypocausts and atriums. They sent their sons to Roman schools, but in their hearts, they remained watchers of stars and keepers of stones. In the countryside, Roman-style farms spread across the hills. Wheat replaced barley. Villas rose near sacred springs. But the household gods often stood beside antlered idols, with no names, vestiges of a past that would not vanish. The land itself seemed to breathe easier under this uneasy peace. The roads stayed open, markets thrived, temples welcomed both Mars and unknown forest spirits under shared roofs. It was not integration. It was duality. In the town of Venta Icenorum, once the heart of Boudica's homeland, a forum was built with imperial funds. Columns lined the central plaza. Traders sold goods from Gaul, Africa, and Asia Minor. But in the shadows of those columns, old women still whispered prayers to the earth. And when the wind blew across the fields, it carried two languages, Roman officials. The shift, they called it Romanization. They wrote of progress, of barbarian minds made civil. But the truth was stranger. The Britons had not been conquered. They had been absorbed, and in doing so, they had changed Rome more than Rome knew. In Londinium, a wealthy Briton named Lucius Camulodunensis became a magistrate. His name was Roman, his estate impressive. But in his garden stood a standing stone carved long before his grandfather's time. He claimed it was decorative, but each Beltane he lit a candle beside it, just in case. The new generation grew up in two worlds. They recited Virgil in the morning and sang old songs by firelight in the evening. They wore tunics to school and animal pelts at harvest festivals. Their world was layered like the soil itself, Latin words above, native roots below. They were the children of empire, but they were also the children of the mist. Even in religion, a blending occurred. In Bath, Sulis Minerva became one of the most venerated deities in Britain. Pilgrims came from across the empire to bathe in her waters. Some saw Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom. Others saw Sulis, the ancient guardian of healing. Both left offerings. Both were heard. Still, there were places Rome never touched. The far north remained a riddle. Beyond Hadrian's wall, the old tribes endured untaxed, uncounted, unconquered. And the western hills of Wales sang a different song of warriors and poets of dreams not found in Rome's scrolls. But within the heart of Britain, a quiet understanding had settled. Rome would remain. For now. And the Britons, they would wait. Some Roman writers lamented the loss of Roman purity. They wrote with disdain of Britons in togas, speaking poor Latin and keeping strange customs, but others saw it differently. A philosopher visiting from Gaul wrote, "In Britain I saw a people who had joined us, not through chains, but through silence. And in that silence, they taught us something of ourselves." Of course, not all was peace. Taxes still weighed heavily. Famine struck in the north. Bandits haunted the roads at dusk, but the fires of rebellion no longer burned openly. They smoldered in stories and song, in the way a child hesitated before saying grace to a Roman god. The pact was not written in ink. It was written in compromise, in generations born into complexity. One evening in the village of Durovernum, a Roman merchant asked a local farmer how long he had been under Roman rule. The farmer tilted his head and replied, "My father fought Rome. I trade with it. My son may forget it." Time moved forward. Temples aged, streets cracked, but something strange had happened. Rome had laid down its sword, and in doing so, it had found something resembling belonging. But belonging built on silence is brittle, and silence, as Britain has always known, does not last forever. They stood in stone once, Jupiter with thunderbolt in hand, Minerva armored and calm, Mars blood-red and watching. Around them incense burned, prayers were murmured, offerings were left with care, a coin, a cup of wine, the blood of a lamb. And beside them other gods, older, quieter, nameless, carved from trees, formless but felt. Guardians of rivers, spirits of hills, mothers of the moon. For a while they shared space. Shrines in temples, altars in forests, a compromise of belief. But gods are not eternal. They need voices to remain. And when the voices stop, the gods begin to fade. In the early years of Roman Britain, religion was everywhere. Temples crowned hills and markets. Household altars flickered in every villa. Each day began with a ritual. Each death with a coin placed for passage. It was not just belief, it was rhythm, and for a time it worked. In Bath, Sulis Minerva ruled the waters. Pilgrims scratched their pleas into lead curse tablets and cast them into the sacred spring. To the goddess I give this cloak. May the thief never sleep. In the north, Mars Cocidius, part soldier, part forest spirit, guarded the wild edges. His image carved into red stone eyes ever watching. In Londinium, Mercury danced between trade stalls. Venus smiled over gardens, and deep in the countryside, horned gods lingered behind oak groves, their names never spoken aloud. Rome had brought its gods, but Britain had whispered back. Then came the drift. It was not war, not even policy. It was time. Children stopped asking the names of the statues. Offerings grew fewer. Altars gathered dust. Not out of defiance, out of distraction. The empire no longer believed in its own gods the way it once had. Philosophy crept in, cynicism, politics, and new religions too. Whispers from the east of a single god nailed to a cross rising again. In Britain, the change came softly. A villa near Verulamium kept a shrine to Jupiter for 3 generations. On the 4th, it became a pantry. A roadside altar to Mercury crumbled during a storm. No one repaired it. They used the stones to patch a pig pen. In a town once devoted to Mithras, his underground temple flooded. The lamps went out. The cave stayed dark. Even the native gods were not spared. The druids were long gone. Their groves burned or repurposed. The sacred lakes now fed mills. Those who remembered the old rites had grown old. Their children prayed to no one, and the gods in turn began to leave tumult, not in anger, not in thunder, just absence. In the rain-soaked north, a Roman officer once wrote a letter to his sister in Gaul. He described the endless gray skies, the silence of the garrison chapel, and how even the priests seemed bored. "I fear the gods no longer walk with us," he wrote. "Or worse, we no longer look for them." A shepherd in Cornwall, claimed to have seen a horned figure standing in the mist near dawn, but when he returned with others, nothing remained but hoofprints in the mud, and no one believed him. A mason working near Aquae Sulis found a statue buried in clay. Sulis Minerva, face cracked, eyes blind. He placed her by the stream. People came. Then they stopped, and one winter the river rose. The statue was swept away. In a grove outside Caleva, a shrine had been built for both Roman and British gods, a strange structure of mixed symbols and blended styles. After a storm, they said it was time. No one rebuilt it, and yet, not all was lost. In the hills, travelers still left small stones in certain circles unconsciously quietly. A habit passed down unspoken. In the forest, a mother still tied a ribbon to a tree for her child's fever, not because she believed, but because her mother had done the same. And sometimes when the wind passed through the ruins of a temple, it almost sounded like a voice. Not angry, not begging, just remembering. The rain fell and the gods fell with it. Not shattered, not slain, but submerged. Forgotten, but never gone. When archaeologists dig through Roman Britain today, they often find broken altars, buried votive offerings, statues face down in the soil. The symbols remain. The names are still carved, but the meaning is distant, as if the land itself is trying to remember what it once believed. And every so often, when the mist hangs just right, when the ruins echo under your feet, you feel it. That something once holy stood here, and maybe for a moment it still does. The wind did not stop. It whistled through the stone walls of the fort, rattling doors, sliding beneath cloaks, finding skin wherever it could. It screamed through the cracks in the barracks. It howled across the cliffs and curled like fingers around the towers. Here at the very edge of empire, there was no Rome, only gray. The garrison at Segedunum, like many others along the coast, was not built for comfort. It was built to stand. A block of barracks, a grain store, a granary, a bathhouse, nothing more. And beyond it the North Sea, endless, indifferent. The soldiers posted here came from far away. Syria, Numidia, the Rhine frontier. Men who had once baked under desert suns now stood watch beneath a sky that never cleared. They did not understand the fog. They did not speak the local tongue. They did not know why the sea moaned louder on certain nights. They were not told. No one told them much. The days were repetition, dawn patrol, fort inspection, sentry duty, repair the wall. Write to no one. Some carved tally marks into the beams above their cots days past, or perhaps prayers. Others wrote letters they never sent. And some stopped writing altogether. One legionary posted from Thebes kept a diary in broken Latin. Today the rain was sideways. The cow gave no milk. I think the wall moved in the night. Supplies came irregularly. Salted fish, stale bread, the occasional cask of wine. Sometimes the barrels arrived with bits of mold floating inside. They drank it anyway. The sea was too rough to fish reliably. The land too cold to plant. What the garrison had was time. And time here grew heavy. They passed it in strange ways. Some whittled faces into discarded wood. Some chased rats for sport. Some stared out at the water for hours, convinced they saw shapes beneath the waves. On certain nights when the moon was sharp and the air unbearably still, the soldiers would gather at the walls, not to guard, but to listen to what they couldn't say. But something moved in the mist. One morning, a soldier was found standing in the surf armor, rusted with salt eyes wide. He had no memory of how he'd gotten there. only that he'd heard a voice, a woman's voice, calling him home, but he had no home. Not anymore. The locals rarely came near the garrison. They traded sometimes leather-smoked meat charms carved of bone. But they did not linger. They looked at the fort like one might look at a tomb, and when they left, they always scattered ashes on the road behind them. The soldiers thought it was superstition, but one of them began doing it too. Sometimes new recruits arrived. They brought stories of Rome, of theaters, of Son of Laughter. They stayed wide-eyed for weeks. Then the sea took it from them. The quiet changed them. They stopped telling stories. They began whispering in the corridors. They began looking inland when they dreamed. A chaplain once visited the garrison. He held a service, invoked Jupiter, blessed the men. They nodded politely. No one returned the next day. The altar he erected was knocked over by the wind that same evening. He left the next week. The wind stayed, and still they watched. They watched the gray horizon day after day for sails that never came, for invaders, for relief, for something, anything to prove they were not alone. But nothing came. Just the endless sea and the long, slow erosion of memory. The commanding officer once declared that they would write a full history of the fort records of every watch, every visitor, every shipment. He set the scribes to work. After a year, the scrolls grew damp. Mice chewed the corners. The ink faded. The project was abandoned. No one argued. At night, the soldiers told stories by the fire, of ghosts seen walking the parapets, of lights on the water too slow to be ships, of music in the fog soft and bitter, like something remembered too late. Some believed, some laughed, but all listened. One day, a soldier carved this into the outer wall. Roma has forgotten us. We are the breath it exhaled and never drew back in. It was scratched away the next morning. But everyone had seen it. In time, men were rotated out. New men replaced them, and then new men again. But always the sea stayed the same, gray, cold, whispering. And when the empire began to fracture, when distant legions rebelled, when Gaul grew restless, when the emperors died faster than coins could be minted, no message came for the garrison. They stood at their post and watched. Until even the watching stopped, the fort fell into ruin. Grass swallowed the barracks. Rain blurred the carvings. And the wind, always the wind, passed through empty windows. Today, tourists walk the ruins. They take photos. They read the plaques. But some say, if you stay long enough, if the sea is just right, you'll hear boots on stone. You'll hear breathing in the fog. And someone, just someone, still watching. The empire spoke in silver. Every coin minted bore the face of an emperor, stern, idealized, eternal. On the reverse gods, victory's promises in Latin. To hold one was to feel Rome's breath. To trade one was to participate in something vast and orderly. In Britain, these coins arrived slowly, first by conquest, then by commerce, then by habit. They clinked into marketplaces. They filled temple coffers. They slipped into the cracks of villas and the palms of peasants. For a time, they were everywhere. A farmhand in southern Britain might carry a denarius bearing Hadrian's face to buy salt or grain. A merchant in Londinium might accept sestertii stamped in the name of Trajan. Children played with worn bronze asses, rubbing the emperor's profile smooth until he vanished. No one questioned their presence. The coins simply were, as normal as the rain, as Roman as the road beneath one's feet. But then the drift began, not a collapse. A slow, uneven forgetting. The minting of coins grew erratic. Emperors changed faster than the money could catch up. Civil wars disrupted shipments. Local officials authorized unofficial currency, smaller, thinner, often debased. The silver darkened. The faces lost detail. In Britain, the people adapted. They used what they had. Old coins alongside new. Roman mixed with imitation, and slowly value became memory. A shopkeeper in Verulamium accepted a copper coin he could no longer read. A farmer buried his last silver piece beside a fence post for luck, he said. A soldier tossed a coin into a well, not for the gods, but for silence. The coins still moved, but they no longer spoke Rome. Language followed the same path. Latin had once arrived like a tide, precise, structured, proud. It filled law courts, temples, markets. It was the tongue of command, of commerce, of ambition. Children of tribal leaders learned it in scroll-lined schools. Soldiers barked it on the parade ground. Scribes copied edicts until their hands cramped. For a century it reigned, but Britain was never quiet. In homes and hills, the old languages persisted. Brythonic, soft and fluid, lived on. In hearthside stories and whispered charms. Traders spoke a mix of tongues Latin, with Celtic roots, with local dialects, with loan words from Gaul or Germania. In Londinium's crowded streets, no one spoke pure Latin. Instead, a creolized murmur grew, a hybrid tongue. Not wrong, just different. A Roman teacher once lamented in a letter, "The children here confuse the cases. They rhyme when they ought to reason, and yet somehow they understand one another." In a small villa near Isca graffiti was found centuries later on a kitchen wall, "Lupa est bonus, suilios carat bene." The first phrase makes sense. The second, no known Latin scholar can fully translate it. Perhaps it meant something once, or perhaps it was never meant to be read by Rome. By the 3rd century, Latin inscriptions became rarer. Spelling grew erratic. Grammar dissolved. A gravestone near York reads, "Hirlius Tetricus." He was good. He made bread. May him be warm. Crude but clear. The Latin had bent, but it still spoke. And even as Rome receded, its words lingered. Market from Mercatus. Wall from Vallum. Street from Strata. The empire had tried to name the world. And even in its fading, some names stuck. But the coins stopped coming, and the new words spoken in firelight and field began to drift again. Changing. Splitting. Merging with others. What began as Latin became something else. Something that did not belong to Rome, nor to the old tribes. A new tongue, a future whisper. One day, a shepherd found a coin beneath a fallen tree. It was silver, worn. The emperor's face half erased. He did not know who it was. He did not care. He tied it to a string and wore it around his neck. A charm against hunger. He called it the face stone. He said it made the sheep stay close. 1,000 years later, that coin was found again, still strung, still silver, and no one could say if it had ever bought anything at all. But it had meant something, and sometimes meaning is what survives longest. Today, archaeologists dig up coins across Britain by the thousands, some pristine, some melted, some turned green with time. They catalog them, date them, classify emperors' mince alloys, but none of them can say what a farmer thought when he pressed one into a child's palm, or what language the child used to say thank you. The coins remain, the Latin remains, but they no longer command. They no longer explain. They drift. They echo, like voices in fog, like words in dreams. It began with rumors, whispers carried by traders, echoes in the letters of officials. Strange silences in the usual flow of goods from the continent. The great world across the channel. The world of Rome proper had begun to crack. No one shouted it. No trumpet blew. But something was wrong, and the storms had started to come. In Londinium, merchants waited weeks for shipments that never arrived. In Verulamium, the governor delayed salaries. Just a brief pause, he claimed. In Eboracum, the legions noticed they were eating more barley than wheat, and still no answers came from Rome. Only silence. It was the 3rd century now, and across the empire, the center was folding in on itself. Emperors rose and fell within months. Armies fought armies in civil wars, so frequent they became ordinary. The Rhine frontier trembled. Gothic raiders swept into the Balkans. The Persian Empire surged in the east. Rome, the city that had once sent orders like lightning, now whispered from across a sea that seemed to grow wider with every season. For Britain, this was not an invasion. It was abandonment. And in many ways, that was worse. Governors still ruled on paper. Coins were still minted more lead than silver. Edicts still arrived late, often irrelevant. But something deeper shifted. The idea of Rome, of being Roman, had once given Britain its shape, its laws, its dreams. Now that idea flickered, like a candle in an empty temple. The ports at Rutupiae and Dubris grew quieter. Fewer ships, fewer letters, fewer faces. A Roman courier once stepped off a boat with a scroll sealed in wax. It bore orders from an emperor already dead, 2 months before it was opened. The garrison laughed. Then they obeyed the orders anyway. What else could they do? And yet, as the storm raged across the continent, life in Britain did not stop. The markets still opened. Farms still sowed. The roads remained for now. But with each season, the island grew heavier. Not with threat, but with expectation. Something was coming. Or maybe something was leaving. In a small fort near the western coast, a commander wrote in his final report, "The sea is restless. The men speak of going home, but none know where home is. If no ship comes by winter's end, I will release them." No ship came. No reply returned. The fort emptied. Meanwhile, across the channel, chaos bloomed. The Gallic Empire broke away its own Rome within Rome, then rejoined, then collapsed again. The emperors barely mentioned Britain anymore. When they did, it was as a burden, a cost, a distant corner too cold and costly to keep. In one council, a senator asked aloud, "What does Britain give us that is worth the sea?" No one answered. Back in Britain, local leaders stepped forward. Not rebels, not kings, just men who refused to wait for Rome. They organized defenses, printed their own coins, wrote their own laws in halting Latin, or none at all. One even called himself Dux Britanniarum, the Duke of the Britons. It sounded Roman. That was enough. And all the while, the storms kept coming. Ships blown off course, ports flooded. One winter, the Thames froze for weeks, and a Roman lighthouse collapsed into the sea. It had stood for nearly 200 years. No one rebuilt it. In the temples, fewer candles were lit. In the bathhouses, water stopped being heated. In the forums, statues were taken down not in anger, but to reuse the marble. The gods, like the governors, had left. Even the legions, once the spine of Rome in Britain, began to fracture. Some disbanded. Some deserted. Some swore allegiance to local lords. One unit, left unpaid for a year, simply marched south and vanished into the hills. Only their shields were found stacked neatly by the sea. A poet in Londinium wrote, "We are the island now. The sea has turned its face, and yet still, the people waited. For sails, for messages, for rescue. But what came instead were fires on the far shore, refugees, war bands, a trickle of chaos that grew with each tide. Britain had once been the edge of a great circle. Now it was a thread fraying. In a stone house near the Kent coast, a Romanized Briton kept a statue of Victory on a small shelf. Her wings had chipped, her base was cracked, but he cleaned her each week. One day he looked out at the gray water and said aloud, "They are not coming back." "Are they?" No one answered. Only the wind. No one knows the exact day they left. There were no trumpets, no parade, no last speech carved into marble. The legions that had once stormed across the Thames built cities in the mud and carved their will into stone, simply turned and went. And Britain, for the first time in nearly 4 centuries, watched Rome vanish over the horizon. The order came quietly, likely around AD 410. It wasn't written in gold. It wasn't delivered by a grand courier. It was a line buried in a letter from the Emperor Honorius to the cities of Britain. "See to your own defenses." That was all. No aid, no promise. No explanation. Rome had stopped being a presence. Now it stopped pretending. The legions stationed at Iberacum Deva Londinium and along Hadrian's wall had waited for this, not with hope, with weariness. For years they had heard of chaos in the heart of the empire, civil wars, barbarian invasions, plague, debt, betrayal. Rome had become distant. And then it became silent. And from the commanders gathered what men they could. They left the forts they had maintained for lifetimes. They took their standards, their sacred eagles, and what honor they had left, and they marched south, to the coast, and from the coast to ships, and from ships into history. Some hoped to return, others knew better. One soldier wrote a final note on the inside of his shield. The walls held, the heart did not. He buried the shield beneath the barracks. It was found 1,500 years later, still stained with rust, still readable. For those left behind, there was no ceremony, no clear line between occupied and abandoned. The garrisons were simply empty, the roads unpatrolled. The tacksmen stopped arriving. The grain requisition ceased. At first it felt like relief, then it felt like loss. Local leaders, once tribal, then Romanized, stepped forward. Some styled themselves dukes or counts. Others claimed nothing, only land. Some held fast to Roman customs. Others burned them and turned to the past. In Londinium, the forums grew silent. Grass pushed between the stones. Shops closed one by one. Some families fled inland. Others stayed stubbornly pretending the world had not shifted beneath their feet. A potter in the city scrawled onto a clay tablet, "No soldiers, no governor, only the river remains." At Verulamium, a villa owner wrote a letter begging Rome for aid. No reply came. He sent a second. No ship arrived. He sealed the third letter into a ceramic jar and buried it under his orchard. Centuries later, the jar was found. The letter inside was blank. The ink had washed away. The wall in the north, once patrolled by thousands, became a ruin of echo. The towers still stood, but the watchmen were gone. Shepherds climbed the battlements to gaze at the sky. Children scratched games into the mortar. The wind, once challenged by Roman stone, now passed freely, and the people began to forget what the wall had once meant. One evening, a woman in the south told her son, "This road was Roman." He looked at the dirt beneath his feet. "What's a Roman?" Not all mourned the passing. In the western hills, the bards sang of freedom. In the forests, old rites returned. In hidden groves, statues long buried were unearthed and washed clean by rain. But even in that revival, something had changed. Rome had not just brought war and law, it had brought connection. Its departure meant isolation, and Britain was now alone. A stone marker was erected near the cliffs at Dover. Its inscription has long since eroded. But beneath it, archaeologists found a row of footprints fossilized in clay, heading west, away from the sea. Those left behind became something new. Not Roman, not quite Britain, a third thing. They spoke in mixed tongues. They built with broken bricks. They prayed to half-remembered gods. And they waited for centuries for someone else to come, someone who never bore an eagle, someone who brought other storms. But that is another story. As for the last legion, no one recorded their final campfire. No one painted their departure. But perhaps on some night, a soldier stood at the edge of the dock, looked once more at the island behind him, insolent, and whispered, "We did not tame you. We only passed through." And the sea, as always, said nothing. Londinium, Iberacum, Verulamium, once they were proud. Stamped on coins, written in dispatches, etched into marble. Now they were forgotten. Not suddenly, but like candles burning out in a closed room, flickering. Then nothing. In Londinium, weeds pushed through forum tiles. Statues collapsed not from rage, but from time. A bronze likeness of Claudius lay half-buried near the riverbank, its face worn smooth by centuries of rain. Once Londinium had been the gateway trade law temple's voices from across the empire. Now it was quiet. The bridge had collapsed. The baths had gone cold, and the market square became a pasture. Shepherds led sheep between columns. Children played in the shadow of crumbling arches, unaware they once stood beneath gods. They called it Lundaean, a softer name, a shorter memory. Verulamium was the first to go. After Boudica's fire, it had risen again, stone for wood order from ash. Its walls were high, its mosaics intricate. It boasted a basilica nearly the size of Rome's own. But without Rome, there was no reason. Trade dried. Scribes vanished. Shrines gathered moss. One winter, a fire broke out in the North Quarter. No one rebuilt. The last civic official wrote a message, sealed it in wax, and sent it south. It was never answered. The people left, one by one, house by house. By the 5th century, the city was empty. Only the mosaic floors remained fishbirds' vines. Beautiful, untouched, exposed to the sky. A traveler once slept atop the image of a dolphin. He thought it was a river stone. He never knew its name. Iberacum held out longer. In the north, it had served as a military stronghold, an imperial capital during times of crisis. 2 emperors had ruled from within its walls. Legions had marched beneath its towers. But even here, forgetting came. The fortress became a quarry. Its stones were taken to build huts. The grand altar to Jupiter was buried under a chicken coop. Locals called it Eoforwick, a name that echoed something older, something animal, something the earth remembered. And so the cities of Roman Britain did not fall in flame. They dissolved into fields, into silence, into language. Where there had once been inscriptions, there were now only outlines. Where once prayers had risen, only the wind moved through the broken halls. And where once names had been spoken, now only echoes remained. An old man in a village near the ruins of Kaleva told his grandson, "They say giants built the stone city." What was it called? No one remembers. Archaeologists today find layers rooms beneath rooms. Roman tiles beneath medieval thatch. Latin carved beneath English bricks. A column used as a well base. A temple floor turned into a pigsty. It was not destruction. It was transformation. In one field, a farmer found a tile stamped with leg tex val, the mark of the 20th Legion, Valeria Victrix. He used it to patch a hole in his barn. He never knew the Legion had once fought across half the known world. He only knew the tile was flat and strong. Some towns survived in name. Lincoln from Lindum Colonia, York from Iberacum, London, a shadow of Londinium. But names are not memory. They are shells. The heart of the city, the rhythm, the soul, the purpose was gone. And yet beneath the silence, something remained. Footsteps in tiled corridors. Dreams that placed people in rooms they'd never seen. Children digging in gardens and pulling up glass beads, coins, fragments of statues. Sometimes they held the pieces and said, "This feels old." They were right. A monk in the 7th century wrote of passing through the ruins of a vast city, overgrown and lifeless. I walked among the homes of the ancients. Their gods are stone. Their voices are birds. Their names, gone. The land had reabsorbed Rome. Not with anger, not even with joy, just with time. Londinium forgot its laws. Verulamium forgot its mosaics. Iberacum forgot its emperors. But the ground remembered. And in dreams, sometimes, it speaks. The road was still there. Not in the way it once was, wide, clean, humming with carts and sandals, but in form. A long, straight scar across the landscape. Trees bent around it. Fences ended at its edge. Animals refused to cross it at night. It had no name now, but it had memory. Once this had been a Roman strata, a stone highway linking Londinium to Iberacum. Built with layers of gravel mortar stone. Precision. Logic. A road for empire, for movement, for control. Now it was a path between farms. Sheep grazed beside it. Children raced along its worn edges. They called it the old line. They did not know where it led. But they knew not to dig too deep near it. The spade always struck something. Across Britain the roads remain, buried under hedgerows, running behind modern fences, visible only after rain, when the soil sinks slightly along their path. Walk them in silence, and sometimes they hum beneath your boots, not loud, just enough, like breath from beneath stone. Walls too survived, but not proudly. They lie beneath fields, crooked ribs of forgotten villas. They run along riverbeds, lipped with moss, smeared with mud. They sleep beneath modern cities' cellars, resting atop sanctuaries. No one built them recently. No one dares remove them, because sometimes the lamb remembers more than we do. In the village of Caerwent, a farmer tried to expand his garden. His shovel hit stone, regular-shaped, unnatural. He uncovered a wall, then a corner, then a floor, mosaic of dolphins and scrollwork. He covered it again. He said the dreams came after. He moved. In the south, a church was built atop what had once been a Roman bath. Its foundation stones still held the heat of 2,000 years ago. Parishioners complained the floor was always warm. Some said that was a blessing. Others said otherwise. There is a road in the Midlands, long, straight, never paved. On cold mornings, mists rise only along its length. Travelers report hearing whispers, soft marching, or the sudden scent of foreign spices. No buildings remain nearby, just earth, and under that earth of roar. Some walls speak more plainly. A collapsed aqueduct in the north still holds its arch barely. Its keystone bears an inscription so worn, only one word remains. Eternitas, eternity. But nothing lasts forever. Even eternity fades. A shepherd near the Pennines found his sheep refusing to cross a certain field. He followed them curious. There under frost and grass was a perfect square of stone, A foundation. A barracks. He marked it with a wooden post and told no one. For centuries, the British people lived atop Roman bones without knowing. They plowed fields over mosaics. They dug wells through temple floors. They broke amphorae and tossed them with pig slop, not in spite. In innocence, because no one had told them what was beneath, until one day someone did. In the 18th century, antiquarians began to unearth it all again. A stone here, a coin there, a tiled floor revealed by a flood. They drew sketches, took notes, gave new names to old places, and for the first time in 1,000 years, Rome rose again briefly in imagination. But imagination is not memory, and ghosts do not always like to be seen. Even today, surveyors find outlines on aerial photos, long-forgotten villas, hidden forts, cities beneath cities. They dig, they document, they name. But the earth never gives up everything, and some ruins never want to be found. Walk any wooded path in Britain and look carefully. The line between past and present is not always solid. Sometimes a tree grows along an old wall, its roots curling like fingers into Roman brick. Sometimes a stone in the middle of nowhere has a name carved into it. Sometimes the wind moves differently across a field once tiled. And sometimes the road beneath your feet is older than the church beside it. People ask why the Romans built so much in stone. Maybe they thought it would make them eternal. Maybe they were right, but only in pieces, only in fragments, only in whispers. A Chad once found a coin in a hedgerow. She showed it to her grandmother. The old woman turned it over, squinting. "That face don't mean much now," she said. "But I suppose someone once thought it meant everything." She gave it back to the child. "Bury it again," she added. "Let it rest." They called it the work of giants. The walls, the roads, the mosaics and statues, the tiled baths and buried temples, the people said, could have been built by human hands. It was too precise, too old, too quiet, so it must have been giants. That was the only explanation that made sense, and in a way, they weren't wrong. The Romans came like giants, with their legions and languages, their gods and governors, their endless appetite for stone and law. They carved their presence into the bones of the land everywhere always. They did not ask. They imposed. And they believed, as all empires do, that they would never be forgotten. But memory is not marble. It does not hold its shape so easily. When the legions left, the land did not cheer. It did not collapse. It simply began to breathe again. The people whispered in their own tongues once more. The roads led to fields, not forums. The gods changed shape or disappeared altogether. The Roman voice grew faint. Then it fell silent. And yet, some things do not truly vanish. Walk the hills of Britain today, and you will find their footprints. A wall in a sheep pasture. A buried coin glinting in morning frost. A tile beneath a church. A name half Latin in a village no longer aware of why it sounds the way it does. Even in the way the roads bend, there is memory. The Romans never intended to be ghosts. They came to stay, to rule, to outlast. But time wears even empire thin, and in the end, what remained was not glory, not marble, but fragments, scattered, unfinished, uncertain. A farmer plows too deep and strikes red brick. A child uncovers a face in clay. A hiker sees a straight path in the woods and wonders who walked it first. These are the echoes, the breath of the giants. They crumbled, but they did not disappear. Their stories sleep beneath your feet, in the foundation of your home, in the pattern of your words, in the silence between place names that no longer match their meaning. In every act of forgetting, there is a trace of what came before. The gods are gone. The legions are dust. The cities are grass and root and ruin. But the questions remain. Who built this? Why did they leave? Where did they go? And the answer whispered in the stones is always the same. They were here. And then they weren't. But part of them still is. A traveler once stood at the remains of Hadrian's wall. Wind howled. Rain crept in sideways. He placed a hand on the cold stone. Not to pray, not to claim, but to feel. "You're still here," he said. No one answered. But the wall did not fall. History does not end. It settles. Layer upon layer like dust, like soil, like memory.